Reading 13 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 3, December 29th, 1945. The Parable of the Horse, Carriage, and Driver, Paper 2. We spoke last time about the parable of the horse, carriage, and driver, which is one of the parables of the work dealing with man's inner situation. You will remember that the driver in this parable is sitting in the public house, and the horse and carriage are outside, and both in a bad state. The first thing that must happen is that the driver must awaken from his drunken sleep and attend to the horse and the carriage, and eventually climb onto the box and take hold of the reins. Then it is said that he may find the master sitting in the carriage behind him, directing him in which direction to drive. In our last conversation about this parable, I dwelt more especially on the point that the driver has to climb up to the box and indicated that he cannot drive the horse and carriage from the level of the ground. From this level, he cannot control anything. At the same time, I said that a man might come to the point where he says, "I will drive." This happens when, through long observation of himself, he begins to see that he must do something with himself, and he can be no longer carried along in the idea of his mechanical life. But although he makes this decision, "I will drive," yet he is far from the possibility of driving. Further stages are necessary, and further experiences with himself. His attention will be drawn to certain sides of himself. In that internal communion with oneself that comes from the growing need of the work and the growing new knowledge of oneself gained from self-observation, he will perceive in many ways that he must climb up in himself before he can drive, that is, reach another level. Otherwise, he is bound to fail continually and probably simply give up trying to do anything with himself in the way of self-change. In other words, he has to climb up to the level of self-remembering, because no one can drive his horse and carriage unless he has something of that intensity of consciousness and self-awareness that belongs to the third state of consciousness, to which the work points. What is it that the work says is the most important thing for us to practice? It says that we must become more conscious and in fact begin to reach the level of self-remembering, self-awareness, and self-consciousness. Some people, not understanding the work, although in contact with it, see that life goes anyhow, that it is a tragedy, a complete muddle, a veritable babble. And having got to this point, they perhaps become negative without comprehending that this is exactly what the work teaches about life. They simply stick, not seeing the work, but only the chaos of life. The work teaches that a man must see that everything does happen in life and realize that it is because man is not properly conscious. The work constantly emphasizes that life is mechanical and that this is due to man himself being asleep, not properly conscious. Yes, but the work adds that the practice of this teaching is to make an individual man more conscious when he has realized all this, and it gives him instructions as to how to become more conscious, and so reach another level of himself. When a man observes himself over a long period sincerely, he becomes startled, and through this, a little more conscious of himself. If he does this with a continual renewal of the meaning of the ideas taught in this work, he will become still more conscious, even though it is painful, and begin to reach a level in himself where he can begin in the right way to control lower sides in himself, smaller eyes in mechanical parts of centers that have hitherto controlled him. It is this rising up in oneself from mechanical death, which one mistook for life, that is the object of the work. Ordinarily speaking, we live at a low level of ourselves. For example, we live far too much in small, unpleasant eyes, in dull, stupid, mechanical parts of centers, in silly dreams. And so we too contribute to the general sleep of humanity. Yes, we then help to keep the world asleep. It is exactly wakening out of the sleep of humanity in which one is sharing that is referred to in the parable of the driver in the public house, asleep in dreams and illusions about himself. For a man to wake up, he must begin to cease to have illusions and false imagination. And so here comes in the acute work done from self-observation that separates a man from himself and makes it possible to leave the public house. Let us continue to talk about the stage where the driver must climb onto the box. Understand that this is not a sharply divided stage, but a gradual process is meant of trial and error. Everything is done by order in the work, by the law of 7. For example, he makes a definite aim and keeps on failing. He learns gradually, but in order, that he cannot keep his aim because he goes to sleep continually, and this is because he gets down amongst small eyes that know nothing about his aim or the work. He does not think enough. I use this word deliberately, that he does not think enough. Here, thinking is both remembering and thinking. Thinking and remembering interlock. You have to defend your aim by pumping truth into it as you have seen it. You have to call together in your understanding all truths concerning your aim, I mean work ideas and insights. Otherwise, your aim will deviate. It will then only become a vague memory instead of being a constantly renewed source of truth to you. All truths of this work will fight for you when you have got into a more or less central position in yourself in regard to your aim. But you must continually revisit, re-stimulate yourself in regard to these truths and insights. The work fights for you only when you engage with it mentally through emotional acknowledgement. I said recently that if the ideas or truths of this work stood round you and transmitted their force, you would be able to do. Owing to our limited consciousness and our level of mind, which only holds one thing at a time, this is not possible. It is possible at a higher level, however. That is, light increases as our level is raised. With regard to everything bad and wrong in you, which you may have noticed in action as well as in thought, the ideas of this work, if perceived as true, will fight for you. Only in that way can what is wrong and bad and unnecessary in you be changed. You cannot do it yourself. You go to war. Work eyes will fight with mechanical eyes if you go on giving them the force of the ideas of this work and renewing it always. It is they that fight for you, these work eyes, contacting the work ideas. For example, when you are negative, a work idea suddenly comes into your mind and you find it possible to fight with that negative state, or it simply vanishes. This is an example of the work fighting in you and for you. That is why valuation of the work is so important. It is useless to think you can do all this yourself and by yourself. This thing that you call yourself is useless, and as often as not, it is your worst self, your most mechanical, habitual self, which cannot possibly lead you anywhere and will never withstand any temptation to sleep. Everyone who has felt this work deeply and over a sufficient length of time has already other selves that can fight. But we try to fight ourselves with ourselves, our habitual selves, and not with our new selves. When we are negative, we try to fight our negative state with this thing, ourself. And often we make aims when we are negative. That is, when we are at an even lower level than our ordinary ourself is. Now, when a man is in a negative state, he mechanically thinks lies. The truth of the ideas of the work does not reach him. But it is this that can fight for you. So when you are negative, it is important to try to think the truth by an effort. A negative state, allowed by inner slackness to persist, drives away the work and all its possible influence on you. When a man is in a negative state, the negative part of his emotional center induces a current of lies that flows through his intellectual center. Negative states are only supported by lies in the intellectual center. You cannot think a lie if you are in a good state. It is usually the same lies that are brought up if you observe yourself closely. When a negative state in the emotional center induces lies in the intellectual center, it means that wrong connections in thought and memory are made, often traceable very far into the past, so that in consequence they have become habits of thinking which have never been challenged by yourself. This is a bad state to be in. People begin to die from such lies. In these lies that are excited by negative states in the intellectual center, important things are left out and unimportant things are overemphasized, or what is pure imagination is mingled with what is real, especially with the aid of pride and vanity and suspicion, which have never been corrected, and many other self-injurious distortions are made due to blaming and to internal account-making in general. All this remains incredible to one, unless one catches oneself through self-observation in the act of enjoying these lies. In this inner tangle, many live most of their lives without making any attempt to deal strongly with all this dirt and mess laid down in their psychic path. Laid down in their psychic life. Now, there can be no question of its being possible to climb up onto the box as long as one is full of all this dirt and mess of lies, or evasions, or distortions of the truth which form a kind of midden within us. You will try to climb up onto the box full of this mess of lies, and since you always feel yourself as the leading person in yourself, you will always feel these habitual lies in yourself, which can only be annihilated by a new revelation of yourself coming from the fuller light of consciousness, belonging to the third state of consciousness, that is, to self-awareness. This is where the light will cure you. The light of consciousness will make it impossible for these habitual lies to cling so closely and to form so large a part of the customary feeling of yourself, whereby you have hitherto recognized yourself. So, mounting the box is obviously a long process, and as I said, there is an order in it. The question is, of course, this: what mounts the box? If a mass of habitual, ingrained lies mounts the box, nothing will happen. You can, in no wise, say that the driver has mounted the box, because the driver must be purified by the work. When he is about to mount, he comes to a definite test. Is he really sufficiently awakened yet? Is he really prepared to drive, although perhaps he may have said, "I will drive"? He may get up to the box in imagination, but in this case, he is still asleep and he will fail. Then he may persuade himself that he has done his very best and feel self-pity and give up for the time being. But he has, as yet, done nothing really. He has not faced himself and with the difficulties in his being. So the whole thing remains purely imagination. He is making effort in imagination, but he is not making real effort. People can take the whole of this work in their imagination and never make any real effort whatsoever. Now, when you make a real effort, or a relatively real effort, you never become negative when you fail. This is a sign. Your failure makes you think more and remember more. But when you make an effort in imagination, an imaginary effort, not a real effort, you become negative very quickly and pass into your gallery of self-pity with all its ancestral portraits. Now the outer is like the inner. If you go to a carpenter's shop and pretend to saw a piece of wood, you are making an imaginary effort. You may handle lots of tools and make a noise as if you were working, but you are really doing nothing, and you will get no result. It is exactly the same thing in the inner psychological world. You have got really to make an effort as far as is in your power, in your psychological world. Take, as it were, your self-satisfaction, which is the bane of some in this work. That is the worst thing in them. No one who is filled with self-satisfaction can possibly do this work, and any idea of their climbing up onto the box is quite out of the question. Why? Because a self-satisfied man or woman feels that he or she is already on the box. Actually, they are still fast asleep in the public house, spending all their money in generous forms of imagination about themselves. However, when we begin to realize practically and by direct insight and by mental perception that we are nothing and cannot do, we are very close to being able to get on the box. So one goes down to go up, but no one will ever realize his own nothingness. I mean genuinely and not theoretically, save through the power of this work. And for a very good reason. To realize one's own nothingness in a real way, without having this work to hold on to, might easily destroy a man or turn him into a mass of negative emotion. But to realize increasingly, and in order of experiences, one's own nothingness has nothing to do with negative emotion. Quite the contrary, it can begin to transmit the work. Yet, one does not climb up to the box simply by realizing one's own nothingness, but by a double and paradoxical process in which one has to make effort on the one side and yet know on the other side that one can do nothing without help.